there is one car that can claim the title of being this generation's ultimate motor car, the McLaren F1. Exotic cars are the passion of all motoring enthusiasts. Of these cars, there exists a small, exclusive subset, the supercar. These vehicles have come to represent the state of the automobile art. In 1993, the McLaren F1 burst to the top of this elite club to take the crown as the 20th century's most significant and expensive sports car. The $1 million McLaren F1's new level of technical innovation has literally reinvented the genre of the supercar. The F1 weighs nearly 40% less and has almost 100 horsepower more than any other modern-day so-called supercar. It is the world's fastest road car, with a top speed of 240.14 miles per hour. The F1 has a degree of utility never before seen in any exotic car. With its light, small shape, normally aspirated engine, and low-speed torque, it navigates narrow, slow urban traffic with ease, while seating 3 with ample luggage space.
It's quiet when you want it to be quiet. It makes a wonderful howl when you want to really give it its head. It's very much a road car with a massive performance envelope. One of the great appeals about driving the McLaren is just the enjoyment from using the controls, savouring the smoothness and developing one's driving skill. And so I think the McLaren F1 will go down as the ultimate statement, as a pinnacle of high-performance motoring.
The ultralight F1 weighs in at 2,200 pounds, develops 627 horsepower, and has 479 pounds of torque at 4,000 RPM. It does the quarter mile in 11.1 seconds, reaching 138 miles per hour. Accelerating from 0 to 60 takes just 3.2 seconds. It sees 100 miles per hour in 10 seconds. From 150 to a top speed of 240, the McLaren F1 out-accelerates a Grand Prix car. All this performance, and it still gets 15 miles to the gallon. Not bad. Its huge 13-inch disc stopped the F1 from 80 miles per hour to 0 in 215 feet. The philosophy and technology of the McLaren F1 when classics returns. Welcome back to Classics. From its inception, the McLaren F1 project was guided by a new way of thinking, a radical design approach that would reinvent the genre of the exotic car.
The idea behind the car is that it should be not only the ultimate car from the point of view of engineering, but for a driver's car. And to be the ultimate driver's car, it had to have, for me, a normally aspirated engine with a really good torque spread, compact, good visibility. Central driving position was absolutely essential because of the balance in driving quickly, as in a racing car, and be extremely stiff, light, and safe. And anything you put between the contact patch on the tyres and the driver's seat, hands and feet detracts from that experience. And therefore it was, very early on, it was decided not to use any form of assistance on the brakes, steering, gear change, for instance. We considered semi-automatic gearbox, but it's a driver's car. We wanted to be a modern classic.
Our goal was to produce a vehicle that other people felt was the best in the world. It was conceived to be a vehicle that wasn't made regardless of cost, but was not driven by cost. And therefore we have been able to do things that would just not make commercial sense to a Ferrari or a Bugatti or a Diablo.
The philosophy of the F1 was to produce something that was totally involving. In every aspect it was totally involving. Whether it's in polishing the car and discovering that you enjoy polishing it because you enjoy the shape, sitting in it and enjoying that because you like the feel of the switches and you like the fact that the steering wheel is exactly where you want it to be. You can drive it slowly and it's still a lot of fun, or you can go quicker than anybody else and it's an enormous amount of fun.
Unfettered by either marketing or financial constraints, the F1 is a veritable treasure chest of leading-edge technology.
Well, I think one of the big differences about the McLaren F1 is the fact that it has been built using genuinely 1990s technology. But of course it's very, very expensive to produce, and one of the reasons why the car is so expensive is because it really has embodied this state-of-the-art Formula One technology, and having a full carbon fiber chassis, which of course has become de rigueur in Formula One since early 80s really.
This racetrack-inspired technology includes active systems which are used to control the car at speed and under braking.
I was able to say, right, what do you really need when the car brakes? We have an active aerodynamic control system on the car which pops up a flap at the rear of the car, which not only doubles the downforce on each wheel, but doubles the downforce in the right proportion front to rear axle. So it helps stabilize the car and instantly gives you more grip at each tire. Whereas ABS just stops the wheels locking. It doesn't actually enhance the braking power of the car.
To improve the handling and traction, ground effects are also a part of the F1's active systems.
The McLaren F1 has a ground effect system which is controlling and managing the airspeed under the car to produce a negative lift. This is done by introducing air under the car and controlling it and managing it with the diffuser at the rear. The base suction, that is the low pressure vortex behind the car, helps to suck the car through under the venturi and create the downforce. By flipping up the small wing, we actually increase the suction behind the car and therefore increase the flow underneath the car and enhance the downforce.
These active systems are controlled with computers, which manage chassis functions such as automatic brake cooling, as well as fuel injection and engine parameters. The F1 utilizes today's most sophisticated technology, as well as introducing new patented technologies of its own.
The glass system on the car has a plasma sprayed internal coating inside the glass, which is fired up with 55 volts to produce instant demisting and very fast de-icing on the screen.
The packaging and styling of the world's best sports car when classics return. Just like a hot rod, the McLaren F1 has an incredible power-to-weight ratio. But this isn't just another fast car. This is the ultimate sports car. It reached this pinnacle through clever packaging and layout. Perhaps the most important and successful aspect of the McLaren F1 is in its packaging. By designing the car from the inside out, the F1 team created an ultra-lightweight, non-power assisted driver's car that combines real-world utility with massive power and acceleration.
It was decided without question from day one it was going to be a central seat car, and that the fuel tank was going to be behind the driver. That was kind of fixed stuff. So when one worked ahead of the driver, where his feet came decided where the axle line was going to be, so the front wheels positioned themselves. Gordon then knew that he wanted a minimum distance between the rear axle center line and the back of the engine. So our wheelbase was defined. They were 107 inches, that was it. That's what it had to be.
With the layout determined and placed in the monocoque body chassis structure, the F1 has almost no trade-offs. It has a unique seating for three, air conditioning, a 20-gallon tank, and an enormous 6-liter V12. The F1 weighs in at a little over 1 ton. Add to that its deft handling, in-town low-speed ease of use, and luggage space for a couple of weeks' holiday, it has redefined the meaning of supercar.
The result of this packaging and layout is a car which has outstanding dynamic qualities and good poise and balance, and enough traction to control 627 horsepower.
its reverse design method and the inside complete, styling the outside was next.
We did a little bit of styling and a lot of aerodynamic work, over 1,000 tests in the rolling road wind tunnel. And styling evolved as part of the process rather than dictating what the car should be.
Peter Stevens took all the wind tunnel work and sculpted a distinctive aerodynamic shape with an ultra-low drag coefficient of 0.035.
You know, the shape has to be one that respects what the air's doing at 200 miles an hour. I think that the F1 is deliberately understated. I like the fact that it's understated because the performance is such a startling statement. It doesn't need to brag about itself with its appearance. There was always this feeling with the car that at the front it should be very kind of simple, pure and organic, and it should become more technical as you move back down the car, as the pieces inside the car also became more technical. You start with the radiator, which is a fairly simple, straightforward piece of kit. So that bit of the car is simple and straightforward. You know, as you go through the front suspension, you get to the engine and the gearbox, it's getting a lot more complicated. And to a degree, I wanted to demonstrate that on the outside of the car. So the technology becomes dominant, but still handled in a design way. You know, the technology doesn't overwhelm the design. It simply becomes the influence on the design as you get to the back of the car.
When it came to the choice for the engine, I was absolutely adamant that the car should have a normally aspirated engine of a reasonable capacity. And I was particularly keen to have a 12-cylinder, as that's the classic sports car engine, and for the lovely sounds they make. It's also a naturally balanced engine. A 60-degree V12 is a naturally balanced engine. And I spoke to several manufacturers. I was also aiming, though, for 100 horsepower per litre, which has never been achieved in a production car before. And eventually ended up with BMW Motorsport, who consistently produce engines of more than 90 horsepower per litre. What that gave me was an engine which originally had a target of 550 horsepower, an engine that's now producing over 620 horsepower in a 1,000 kilogram car. It's fully dry sump lubricated for efficiency. It has an electronic system that's more sophisticated than anything that's ever been built before, and that was done by our in-house electronics company. It has variable valve timing, which constantly and instantly controls the valve angle on the inlet cams to bring the torque range way down to as low as 1,500 revs.
And having such a large amount of torque, you're getting on for 500 foot-pounds of torque, that is quite amazing when you can drive the car very gently in top gear from 30 miles an hour to 230 miles an hour in the same gear. That really shows you the flexibility.
Part of the brief to the engine manufacturers of BMW was that it should meet California regulations, which a lot of people are saying are very difficult or if not impossible to meet. So we produced an engine that produces more power per cc than any other performance engine in the history of road cars, and yet it's also the greenest.
Classics returns with high-tech materials, and the manufacturing of the McLaren F1 don't go away.
Has many materials that would not normally be found in a production road car.
The McLaren F1 uses exotic materials such as carbon fibre, uses Dyneema, uses aluminium honeycomb in its body construction. In the suspension we use exotic aluminium, which is heat treatable. In drive shafts, things such as Marangin steel, which is a very tough material that allows the drive shafts to flex. In the engine we use magnesium for lightness and strength. Also on the engine, and we use Inconel, sophisticated alloy for the exhausts, which literally is half the thickness and half the weight of a normal exhaust. We use titanium in lots of areas, such as the silencer, such as the throttle pedals and brackets and support activities.
The whole idea was that we should use the best possible material available to man at this time in the world for everything. And at one end of the scale, for instance, we tested all the heat shielding, because obviously this engine produces a massive amount of excess heat. And we found that the spacecraft material, 24 karat gold foil, was the best for radiated heat. In fact, all the materials, wherever we've approached any particular problem on the car, we've really had an open mind on materials.
The manufacturing process of McLaren cars is a very long process. It starts from the initial body construction. We start from buying the carbon thread from the manufacturers. We then have it woven to our own requirements and own patterns and own different weaves, and we receive it in rolls of pre-impregnated fibre. We then cut those impregnated carbon into patterns, very similar to a dressmaking type of pattern, where you lay computer-generated shapes over the carbon, and we then have them laser cut out into the different sizes or hand cut according to the requirements. There are about 130 different components that make up the body, so the 5,000 odd patterns are laid into these moulds. They are laid in layers, in different mixes, different weaves, different orientations. Then the whole mould is transferred to an autoclave. An autoclave is an enormous pressure chamber, a pressure chamber that also can be heated up to 150 odd degrees C and about 90 pounds per square inch. Those components are then brought out of those. Most of them are almost ready to use because the moulds produce the edges to the correct sizes, and the holes, a lot of the holes are actually in the mould. All those components are then progressively built up into small sub-assemblies and larger sub-assemblies, and the things like the whole central monocoque is done as a separate assembly, and the doors, bonnets, the engine covers, all those are then pre-fitted as a pre-fit exercise to ensure that all of the fits and finishes are correct. All those components then arrive back here. Here is a very nice facility, and I wanted to develop an assembly philosophy, an assembly building that was like no other. Even the lift that lifts the car up for assembly is sunken into the floor, completely like an iceberg. All of the work's under the floor. The car is assembled on 5 stations, progressively improving the amount of parts that go onto the car. We start off clearly with the main monocoque structure. We fit into it things like main water pipes and harnesses, and we've attached things like the gold foil that is for heat protection. Progressively going through the assembly, we then put the engine, gearbox into the car. When the car is then dropped onto its wheels, the doors and all of the opening parts are finally assembled.
The composite body chassis structure is the most sophisticated carbon fiber structure since the stealth fighter. This technologically advanced body showed its strength during crash testing.
In the standard crash test that we did, the car was crashed into a concrete block at 30 miles an hour, and had the car had an engine in that worked, it had a dummy engine, it was in such good structural integrity afterwards that it could have been driven away. The windscreen was intact, the doors were fine, even the front wheels were in the same position. It was quite remarkable.
You feel you are in an extremely safe, cocoon-oriented environment in which you are totally positioned to take command. Whilst it is very powerful, it never instills in the driver a feeling of being unsafe.
Yet another unique feature of the incomparable McLaren F1 is a specially designed audio system.
The music system is absolutely wonderful. It has been designed, of course, purposely for the car. It's been designed to be half the weight of the standard Kenwood system. In fact, when we did that maximum speed run, I had the music going, I had the CD on at 200, just turned it down a bit and got on with a serious job of just building up those last 31 miles an hour.
it's time for some fun. The F1 hits the racetrack when classics return. Special look at the McLaren F1. The world's most expensive production sports car found immediate racing success. Amazingly, the race version, known as the GTR, had to have a detuned version of the street car's power plant in order to qualify for FIA GT racing. It also features beefier suspension, brakes, and of course a racing gearbox, as well as some aerodynamic modifications. The McLaren GTR won the BPR Championship 2 years in a row. In endurance racing, at the Le Mans 24-hour, the F1 debuted and won in its first attempt. A second-generation GTR with increased downforce bodywork also took a class win at Le Mans. With only 30 race versions and 70 road cars ever made, the $1 million price tag puts the F1 in a class of its own. This McLaren is the pinnacle of automotive design and engineering for the 20th century. The F1 fascinates all who are seduced by the promise of the ultimate motor car and our need for speed. Looking forward into the 21st century, it's only logical to assume that someday even the McLaren F1 will be out-engineered. But I can't imagine by what. Sure, the technology will continue to improve, but who's going to spend the money to supersede this incredible car? I hope you've enjoyed our presentation. I'm Peter Eisler. We'll see you next time on Classics.